The October rain hammered against the windows of Russo's, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where conversations died when Tiago Valentino walked through the door. At 39, he commanded respect without saying a word. 6 feet of controlled power, wrapped in a perfectly tailored Armani suit. The silver at his temples only added to his dangerous appeal. "Mr. Valentino, your usual table?" The maitre d's voice carried just the right amount of deference mixed with genuine fear. Tiago nodded, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room automatically. Habit. In his world, relaxation was a luxury that could get you killed. The weight of his Glock pressed reassuringly against his ribs as he made his way through the dining room, noting exits, potential threats, escape routes. "Evening, sir." The waitress appeared beside his table with practiced efficiency. Pretty girl, probably mid-30s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Sophia, according to her name tag. "Whiskey, Macallan 25, neat." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Right away, sir." Sophia hesitated, then smiled nervously. "Actually, this might sound strange, but my sister has a tattoo just like yours." Tiago froze. His hand instinctively moved to his left wrist, where beneath the expensive Italian leather of his watchband lay a mark that fewer than 12 men in the world possessed. The crown, an intricate design that marked him as one of the most powerful crime bosses on the East Coast. "Excuse me?" His voice dropped to a whisper that made Sophia take an involuntary step back. I saw it when you were adjusting your watch. The crown with the 3 stars. My sister Katerina has the exact same one on her shoulder." Sophia's voice wavered, suddenly understanding she'd ventured into dangerous territory. Tiago's mind raced. Impossible. The crown wasn't some common street tattoo. It was earned through blood, respect, and power that most people couldn't comprehend. Only the heads of the 5 families bore this mark, and he knew every single one of them personally. "Where is your sister now?" The question came out sharper than he intended. She works at the art gallery downtown. Meridian Gallery." Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Sir, did I say something wrong?" Tiago studied her face carefully. Fear, confusion, but no deception. This waitress had no idea what she'd just revealed, but her sister, that was another story entirely. "Bring me that whiskey," he said finally. "And Sophia." "Yes, sir?" "You never mentioned the tattoo to anyone else, have you?" Sophia shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I just thought it was a coincidence." "Good. Keep it that way." Tiago pulled out a $100 bill and placed it on the table. "For your discretion." As Sophia hurried away, Tiago's phone buzzed. Tommy, his lieutenant. "Boss, we got a problem. The Russians are moving territory again." "Handle it," Tiago replied, his eyes still fixed on the spot where Sophia had stood. "And Tommy, I need you to run a background check. Full workup. Woman named Katerina works at Meridian Gallery downtown. Russians giving you trouble already." Tiago allowed himself a cold smile. "Something like that." 2. The Meridian Gallery occupied a converted warehouse in the arts district, all exposed brick and industrial lighting designed to make Manhattan's elite feel edgy and cultured. Tiago stood across the street for 20 minutes, watching the foot traffic, studying the entrance, planning his approach. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows he could see her. Even from a distance, Katerina commanded attention. Auburn hair caught the gallery lights like liquid fire, and she moved with a grace that spoke of careful training, not the kind you learned in finishing school. Tiago had been around enough dangerous people to recognize the subtle signs. The way she positioned herself with clear sightlines to exits, how her eyes constantly scanned the room, the controlled precision of every gesture. This was no innocent art dealer. When he finally crossed the street and pushed through the gallery's heavy glass doors, the soft jazz and murmured conversations created an intimate atmosphere that felt oddly appropriate for what he suspected would be a pivotal moment in his carefully controlled life. "Good evening." Her voice hit him like a physical force, slightly accented, warm honey over steel. When she turned to face him fully, Tiago understood why powerful men throughout history had started wars over beautiful women. Katerina Volkov was stunning in a way that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. High cheekbones, full lips, and eyes the color of winter storms. But it was the intelligence behind those eyes that made him realize this woman was far more dangerous than any weapon he'd ever carried. "I'm looking for something specific," Tiago said, stepping closer than social convention dictated. "Something with historical significance. Historical pieces can be quite valuable." She matched his proximity, studying his face with an intensity that suggested she was cataloguing details for future reference, depending on their provenance, of course. Provenance is everything, he agreed. Authenticity matters. They stood close enough now that he caught her scent, something expensive and distinctly feminine that made his pulse quicken in a way that both thrilled and alarmed him. In his world, distraction meant death. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately. Katerina gestured toward a small office at the rear of the gallery. I have a feeling your interests are quite specialized. The office was cramped, forcing them into an intimacy that neither acknowledged but both felt. As Katerina reached for a portfolio on the shelf behind her desk, her silk blouse shifted, revealing a glimpse of her left shoulder. There it was, the crown. Identical to his own in every detail, the 3 stars representing power, loyalty, and blood, surrounded by intricate Celtic knotwork that took a master artist months to complete. Interesting tattoo, Tiago said quietly. Katerina froze for just a heartbeat, long enough for Tiago to confirm she was no ordinary art dealer, but short enough to suggest professional training in concealment. A youthful indiscretion, she replied smoothly, but her hand moved instinctively to cover the mark. I was young and thought it looked mysterious. Mysterious is one word for it. Tiago leaned against the desk, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Tell me, Katerina, what do you know about real power? I know enough to recognize it when I see it. Her chin lifted defiantly. And I know enough to be careful around men who wear it like armor. The challenge in her voice sent heat coursing through him. Tiago Valentino had been feared, respected and obeyed his entire adult life. He'd never met a woman who looked at him like she was deciding whether he was worth her time. Careful is smart, he said, his voice dropping lower. But sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is play it safe. Their eyes locked and Tiago felt something shift between them. A recognition, an acknowledgement of equals meeting for the first time. Whatever game they were playing, whatever secrets they were hiding, the attraction crackling between them was real and immediate. I should get back to my customers, Katerina said, but she made no move to step away. Of course. Tiago reached into his jacket, watching her tense slightly, then relaxed when he produced only a business card. When you're ready to discuss authentic historical pieces, call me. She took the card, their fingers brushing in a contact that lasted longer than necessary. Tiago Valentino, she read. And what kind of historical pieces interest you, Mr. Valentino? The kind with real power behind them, he said, heading for the door. The kind that change everything. Me 3. Tiago couldn't concentrate. For 3 days, the memory of winter storm eyes and that impossible tattoo had invaded his thoughts at the most inconvenient moments, during a sit-down with the Torino family, while reviewing territory disputes with his lieutenants, even during his morning workout, when focus was the difference between strength and injury. It was driving him insane. Boss, you're distracted. Vincent Romano, his oldest friend and most trusted advisor, set down his espresso and fixed Tiago with the look that had kept him alive through 20 years in the family business. Distracted gets you dead. They sat in the back booth of Carmine's, a little cafe in Little Italy that had been serving the neighborhood and laundering money for the families since 1952. The owner's grandmother had served Tiago's grandfather, creating a legacy of mutual benefit that transcended mere business. Tell me about the Russians, Tiago said, deflecting. What's the latest intel? Same as yesterday, they're pushing into Brooklyn, testing boundaries, nothing we can't handle. Vincent leaned forward. But that's not what's eating at you. This is about a woman, isn't it? Tiago almost smiled. Vincent knew him too well. They'd grown up together on these streets, survived their first kills together, built an empire side by side. If anyone could read his moods, it was Vince. There's a situation, Tiago admitted. A woman with information she shouldn't have. How much information? Enough to be dangerous. Maybe enough to be useful. Vincent's expression darkened. You want me to handle it? No. The word came out harder than Tiago intended. The thought of Vincent's methods being applied to Katerina made something cold and violent stir in his chest. I'll take care of it personally. Personally? Vincent raised an eyebrow. When's the last time you handled anything personally that didn't involve putting a bullet in someone's head? Before Tiago could answer, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Valentino. I believe you wanted to discuss historical pieces. Katerina's voice was like silk sliding over steel. I have some new acquisitions that might interest you. Tiago felt his pulse accelerate. Where and when? My apartment. Tonight, 9 o'clock. She rattled off an address in Chelsea. Come alone, Mr. Valentino. Some collections are best viewed privately. The line went dead. Tiago stared at the phone, already calculating angles. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. Any smart criminal would use bait this appealing to lure a target into a kill box. But he was going anyway. This is a bad idea, Vincent said, reading his expression. Whatever you're thinking, it's a bad idea. Probably. Tiago finished his espresso and stood. Have the boys do a sweep of the neighborhood. Discreet surveillance only. If something goes wrong, we'll burn the place down, Vincent finished grimly. Boss, at least tell me why you're risking everything for some woman. Tiago paused at the door, thinking of storm-colored eyes and a tattoo that shouldn't exist. Because, Vince, sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. The Chelsea apartment building was upscale but not ostentatious, the kind of place where rich people lived when they wanted to blend in. Tiago spent 15 minutes studying the street before approaching, noting escape routes and potential sniper positions. Old habits. Katerina's apartment was on the 4th floor. When she opened the door, Tiago felt his carefully maintained composure crack slightly. She wore a black dress that managed to be both elegant and provocative, and her hair was pulled back to reveal the graceful line of her neck. You came, she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might be smarter than I gave you credit for. She moved to a small bar cart, her movements fluid and controlled. Whiskey? Macallan? If you have it. I have it. She poured 2 glasses, neat, and handed him one. 2 historical artifacts. 2 dangerous collections, he countered. They drank, and Tiago used the moment to scan the apartment. Expensive furnishings, but sparse. A few books in what looked like Russian. No personal photos. The place felt like a safe house. Somewhere to wait, not to live. So, Katerina said, settling into a leather chair that positioned her with a clear view of both the door and windows, what exactly are you hoping to find in my collection, Mr. Valentino? Tiago remained standing, whiskey in hand, studying her face for tells. I'm hoping to find answers, starting with how a gallery worker in Manhattan came to possess something that belongs exclusively to my world. Your world? She tilted her head, feigning innocence. I'm not sure I follow. The tattoo, Katerina. We both know it's not some random design you picked off a wall in a shop. Tiago moved closer, crowding her space deliberately. That mark represents power that's earned in blood. So either you killed one of the most dangerous men in America to get it, or... Her voice remained steady, but Tiago caught the slight tension in her shoulders. Or you're something much more interesting than you pretend to be. Katerina stood slowly, bringing them close enough that Tiago could feel the heat radiating from her skin. What if I told you that you're right? What if I told you that everything you think you know about power and control is about to change? Before Tiago could respond, the lights went out. Nesusra, 4. In the sudden darkness, in the sudden. Tiago moved on pure instinct. His hand found his Glock as he pressed his back against the wall, searching for threats. But instead of gunfire or the crash of windows, he heard something unexpected, Katerina's soft laughter. Relax, Mr. Valentino. If I wanted you dead, you never would have made it through the door. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting harsh shadows through the apartment. Tiago kept his weapon drawn but lowered, his eyes fixed on Katerina, who had somehow moved from the chair to a position near the kitchen without making a sound. Power outage? He asked, not believing it for a second. Privacy measure. She opened a drawer and pulled out what looked like a small electronic device. My neighbors can be nosy. Tiago holstered his weapon but remained alert. You're full of surprises. You have no idea. Katerina moved closer, and in the dim lighting, she looked like something from a dream or a nightmare. Tell me, Tiago, what do you know about the Bratva, the Russian Mafia? Tiago felt pieces clicking into place like chambers in a revolver. Enough to know they're expanding west, enough to know they're becoming a problem. A problem? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's one way to put it. Another way would be to say that they're cleaning house, eliminating loose ends, tying up unfinished business. And you are? Unfinished business. Katerina reached behind her neck and unclasped a delicate gold chain. From it hung a small pendant, another crown, this one set with 3 tiny diamonds. This was my father's, Dmitri Volkov. You might have heard of him. Tiago had. Dmitry Volkov had been a legend in the criminal underworld, a Russian crime boss who'd built an empire spanning 3 continents before disappearing 5 years ago. The official story was that rival factions had eliminated him. The unofficial story was that he'd stolen something valuable from the wrong people and vanished into the wind. Your father is dead, Tiago said carefully. Is he? Katerina's smile sharpened. The thing about powerful men, Tiago, is that they rarely die as simply as people think. Sometimes they just transition. Into what? Instead of answering, she reached for the zipper at the back of her dress. Tiago's breath caught as the black fabric slipped from her shoulders, revealing the tattoo in its full glory. But it wasn't just the crown that made him stare. It was the scar tissue surrounding it, old burn marks that spoke of torture, interrogation, pain beyond imagination. The Bratva marked me, she said quietly. Before they killed my father, before they destroyed everything I cared about, this tattoo wasn't a choice, Tiago. It was a brand, a warning to anyone who might think about crossing them. Tiago felt something violent and protective surge through him. How did you escape? I didn't escape, I survived. There's a difference. Katerina pulled her dress back up, but the image of those scars was burned into Tiago's memory. For 5 years I've been planning, learning, preparing. For what? Revenge. The word hung between them like a blade. The Bratva took everything from me. My family, my life, 5 choices. Now I'm going to take everything from them. Tiago studied her face in the emergency lighting, seeing past the beauty to the steel underneath. This wasn't some victim looking for protection. This was a predator who'd been hiding in plain sight, planning a war. And where do I fit into your revenge fantasy? You don't. Katerina moved closer. Close enough that Tiago could see the gold flecks in her storm-colored eyes. Unless you want to. Why would I want to get involved in a war between you and the Russians? Because, Tiago Valentino, the Bratva isn't just expanding into Brooklyn. They're coming for Manhattan, for your territory, for your family. She placed her hand on his chest, her touch burning through the expensive fabric of his shirt. The question isn't whether you're going to fight them. The question is whether you're going to fight them alone. Tiago covered her hand with his, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his palm. And if I say yes, if I agree to help you, then maybe we both get what we want. Which is power, justice, each other. The last words came out as barely a whisper, but they hit Tiago with the force of a confession. He looked down at this woman, this beautiful, dangerous, mysterious woman, and realized that somewhere between the gallery and this moment, everything had changed. Katerina, he started, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. The lights will come back on in 60 seconds, she said. When they do, we go back to being what we were before. But right now, in this moment, we can be honest. Honest about what? About the fact that you've been thinking about me every second since we met. About the fact that I've been doing the same thing. Her hand slid up to cup his face. About the fact that we're about to complicate everything. Tiago leaned into her touch, his own hands finding her waist. Complications can be good. These ones might get us killed. Then we'd better make them worth it. He kissed her. And it was nothing like the calculated moves he'd perfected over the years. This was raw need, desperate hunger, the collision of 2 forces that had been circling each other since that first moment in the gallery. Katerina kissed him back with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his with an urgency that spoke of desire too long denied. When the lights flickered back to normal, they broke apart, breathing hard, staring at each other with the knowledge that they'd just crossed a line neither of them could uncross. So, Tiago said, his voice rougher than usual, when do we start planning this war? 5. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a private dining room at the Plaza Hotel, where old money met new power over crystal glasses and $100 steaks. Tiago arrived 15 minutes early, a habit that had kept him alive in a business where punctuality often determined who went home and who went to the morgue. He'd spent the last week in a state of controlled chaos. By day, he managed his legitimate businesses and handled the usual territorial disputes that came with running a crime family. By night, he found himself at Katerina's apartment, planning what could either be the most brilliant strategic alliance of his career or the beginning of the end of everything he'd built. The woman was intoxicating in ways that went far beyond the physical. Yes, the chemistry between them was explosive. Stolen kisses that left him harder than he'd been since his 20s. Touches that burned through expensive clothing and careful control. But it was her mind that truly captivated him. The way she analyzed threats, anticipated moves 3 steps ahead, turned weakness into weapons. Katerina Volkov was dangerous in the best possible way. "You're early." Her voice sent the familiar jolt of electricity through him as she appeared in the doorway, elegant in a navy dress that managed to be both business-appropriate and devastatingly attractive. "Habit," Tiago replied, standing to hold her chair. The gesture was automatic. His mother had drilled proper manners into him long before he'd learned to kill with those same hands. "Good habits keep you breathing in our line of work." Katerina settled into her seat, her eyes automatically cataloguing the room's exits and blind spots. "I've had an interesting week." Define interesting. 3 attempts on my life, for starters. She said it casually, like she was discussing the weather, but Tiago felt ice form in his veins. 3 attempts? His voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "You didn't think to mention this?" "I handled them." Katerina sipped her wine, studying his reaction over the rim of her glass. "But the fact that they found me so quickly means someone very powerful wants me dead. Someone with resources and reach." Tiago leaned forward, his protective instincts warring with his strategic mind. "Details." "First attempt was professional but sloppy. 2 men, suppressed weapons, tried to corner me in the gallery's parking garage." A small smile played at her lips. They weren't expecting someone with my particular skill set. "And the second? More sophisticated. Poison in my morning coffee at the cafe near my apartment." "If I hadn't noticed the bitter almond scent." She shrugged eloquently. "Cyanide is effective but distinctive." Tiago felt his hands clench into fists. The thought of this woman, his mind whispered traitorously, being hunted, threatened, nearly killed, made something primal and violent stir in his chest. "The 3rd attempt? Yesterday, car bomb. Would have been quite spectacular if I hadn't had the vehicle swept for explosives before starting it." Katerina leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Whoever's behind this is escalating quickly, and they're not concerned about collateral damage, which means they're desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "It also means we're running out of time." Tiago turned his hand to capture hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tell me what you need." "I need to know I can trust you." The words came out quietly, but Tiago heard the vulnerability underneath them. "I've been alone for 5 years, Tiago. Planning, surviving, waiting for the right moment. I don't know how to rely on anyone else anymore. You can rely on me." The words came out with more conviction than he'd intended, surprising them both. "Whatever this costs, whatever it takes, you're not alone anymore." Katerina's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for the calculation that marked most interactions in their world. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because her grip on his hand tightened. "There's something else," she said. "Something I haven't told you about my father." "What about him?" "He's not dead." The words hit Tiago like a physical blow. "Dmitry Volkov is very much alive, and 3 days ago he made contact." Tiago sat back, his mind racing. If Dmitry Volkov was alive, it changed everything. The man was a legend, brilliant, ruthless, connected to criminal organizations across 3 continents. He was also supposed to have been executed by his own people 5 years ago. Where is he? Safe, hidden, but not for much longer. Katerina's voice carried a urgency that made Tiago's pulse quicken. "The Bratva has been hunting him systematically, eliminating anyone who might know where he's hiding. That's why they want me dead. They think I'm the key to finding him." "Are you?" "Yes." She met his eyes directly. "And Tiago, there's something else. The reason my father marked me with the crown, the reason the Bratva is so desperate to find him. He didn't just steal money when he disappeared. He stole information, names, accounts, operational details that could bring down half the criminal organizations in Europe." Tiago felt pieces clicking into place. "And now you have access to that information." "I have more than access. I have the complete files. Every corrupt official, every money laundering operation, every murder and extortion scheme the Bratva has run for the last decade." Katerina leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I have enough evidence to destroy them completely. All of them." "Jesus Christ." Tiago ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the implications. "Do you understand what you're sitting on?" "Power," Katerina said simply. "The kind of power that could reshape the entire criminal landscape of the East Coast. The kind of power that could make you the most influential crime boss in American history. Or get us both killed before we can use it." "Yes," she smiled, and there was something wild and beautiful in her expression. But what a way to go! Tiago looked at this woman, this incredible, dangerous, brilliant woman who just offered him the keys to an empire, and realized he was about to make the most important decision of his life. "When do we move?" he asked. "Saa 6. The warehouse in Queens had been abandoned for 3 years, long enough for the city to forget about it, but not long enough for the homeless population to claim it as territory. Perfect for their purposes." Tiago walked through the cavernous space, his footsteps echoing off concrete walls, as he surveyed the setup Katerina had orchestrated. Computer equipment worth more than most people's houses filled a series of tables along the far wall. Maps, photographs, and documents covered every available surface. It looked less like a criminal planning session and more like a military command center. "Impressive," Tiago said, genuinely meaning it. "How long have you been putting this together?" 2 years of active preparation, 3 years of passive intelligence gathering before that. Katerina emerged from behind a bank of monitors, wearing jeans and a black sweater that somehow managed to make her look both professional and irresistible. "I told you, I've been planning this for a long time." Tiago moved closer, drawn as always to her presence like metal to a magnet. The past week had been a careful dance of strategy sessions and stolen moments, kisses that left them both breathless, touches that promised so much more, conversations that revealed layers of complexity in both of them. "Show me what we're working with," he said, trying to focus on business despite the way her proximity affected his concentration. Katerina activated one of the monitors, and Tiago found himself looking at what appeared to be an organizational chart for the entire Bratva operation on the East Coast. Names, faces, territories, financial networks. It was comprehensive in a way that spoke of incredible intelligence gathering and attention to detail. "Alexei Petrov runs the New York operations," Katerina said, pointing to a photograph of a man in his 50s with cold eyes and expensive dental work. "He's smart, brutal, and completely loyal to the Moscow leadership. He's also the one who ordered my father's death, and the one ordering the attempts on your life." "Almost certainly." She switched to another screen showing financial records. "But Petrov is careful. He never gets his hands dirty personally, and he's managed to insulate himself from direct prosecution through layers of legitimate businesses and legal protection." Tiago studied the information, his strategic mind automatically looking for weaknesses and opportunities. "What about his lieutenants?" "Viktor Kozlov handles enforcement. Muscle and intimidation, not much imagination." Another photograph appeared. A younger man with the scarred knuckles and flat stare of a professional killer. "Dmitry Volsky, no relation to my family, manages money laundering through a network of restaurants and construction companies, and Elena Marchenko runs their intelligence operations." The last photograph made Tiago raise an eyebrow. Elena Marchenko was beautiful, in a cold, calculating way that reminded him uncomfortably of certain women he'd known in his business. "How good is their intelligence network?" "Good enough to track me down after 5 years of careful hiding. Good enough to know about our association." Katerina's expression darkened. "Elena is dangerous, Tiago. She's the one who interrogated me 5 years ago. She's the one who—" Her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, where Tiago knew the scars lay hidden beneath her sweater. Tiago felt that familiar surge of protective rage. "Tell me she's on our target list. She's at the top of it." Katerina switched screens again, showing what appeared to be building schematics. "But we're not going to rush in like amateurs. We're going to be smart about this, strategic." "What's the plan?" "We turn their own network against them, use their connections and resources to destroy them from the inside." Katerina moved to a table covered with documents, her fingers trailing over bank statements and shipping manifests. "The Bratva's power comes from their ability to move money and influence undetected. So we detect them, we expose them, we make them visible to law enforcement and rival organizations." Tiago picked up one of the documents, a detailed breakdown of what appeared to be a major drug shipment scheduled to arrive at a Brooklyn warehouse in 3 days. "This is current intelligence. Updated this morning. They think they're invisible, Tiago. They've gotten comfortable, sloppy. That's going to be their downfall." And the personal element? Petrov and the others who killed your father? Katerina's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Oh, we're going to handle them personally. But first we cripple their organization, make them desperate, force them to come to us. Tiago set down the document and moved closer to her, caught between admiration for her planning and concern for the risks they were taking. This is going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything either of us has attempted before. I know. She looked up at him, and he saw the steel resolve that had kept her alive and planning for 5 years. Are you having second thoughts? Instead of answering with words, Tiago cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was meant to be reassuring, a confirmation of his commitment to their alliance. But the moment their lips met, it became something else entirely. Katerina responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pressed closer. Tiago backed her against the table, documents scattering as his hands found the hem of her sweater. 5 years of careful isolation and a week of careful control shattered under the weight of need and trust, and something that felt dangerously like love. Tiago, she whispered against his lips, his name a prayer and a demand. I know, he said, understanding without need for words. I know. They came together with the urgency of people who understood that tomorrow was never guaranteed, that in their world, every moment of happiness had to be stolen and treasured. Tiago lost himself in the taste of her, the sound of her breathing, the way she said his name like it was something sacred. Later, as they lay together on the makeshift bed she'd set up in the back corner of the warehouse, Katerina traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I need to tell you before we go any further. Tiago tensed slightly. In his experience, conversations that started this way rarely ended well. What is it? When this is over, when the Bratva is destroyed and my father is safe, I might disappear again. She didn't look at him as she spoke, her voice carefully neutral. It's who I am, Tiago. It's how I survive. Tiago caught her hand, stilling her restless fingers. And if I asked you to stay, that would complicate things. I'm good with complications. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. We'll figure it out. Katerina, whatever comes after, we'll figure it out together. She studied his face for a long moment, looking for promises he might not be able to keep, commitments that might prove impossible to honor. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she nodded and settled back against his chest. Together, she agreed softly. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the city in deceptive purity. And in a warehouse in Queens, 2 of the most dangerous people on the East Coast held each other close and planned a war that would change everything. 7. The Brooklyn warehouse exploded at exactly 3:17 a.m., sending flames 60 feet into the November sky and taking with it $3 million worth of Bratva heroin. Tiago watched from the roof of a building 6 blocks away, Katerina pressed against his side, both of them feeling the distant heat wash over their faces. Phase 1 complete, she said with satisfaction, lowering the binoculars. Petrov is going to be furious. Furious enough to make mistakes? Tiago asked, though he already knew the answer. In his experience, desperate men were predictable men, and predictable men were dead men. Furious enough to expose himself. Katerina's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She read it quickly, her expression shifting to something Tiago had learned to recognize as dangerous anticipation. My contact at the docks confirms it. Emergency meeting called for tomorrow night. All senior Bratva leadership. Tiago felt adrenaline spike through his system. They'd been planning this operation for 2 weeks, using Katerina's intelligence network and his organization's muscle to systematically dismantle Petrov's operations. The warehouse had been their 3rd major hit, following the destruction of a money laundering front in Manhattan and the strategic leak of compromising photos that had cost the Bratva 2 corrupt police officials. Location? He asked. The Meridian Club, private dining room on the 5th floor. Katerina smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. Petrov thinks he's being clever, choosing neutral ground where weapons aren't allowed. What he doesn't know is that I've had people inside the Meridian Club for 6 months. Security cameras, listening devices, and a very cooperative waitstaff. She turned in his arms, her body warm against his in the November cold. Tomorrow night, we end this. Tiago looked down at her, this incredible woman who turned his carefully ordered world into beautiful chaos. 3 weeks ago, he'd been Tiago Valentino, respected crime boss, feared and untouchable. Now he was something else entirely, a man willing to risk everything for love and justice in equal measure. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his hands finding her waist beneath her dark jacket. "About tomorrow night." "What about it?" "After we take down Petrov and his people, after we've destroyed the Bratva's operations, there's going to be a power vacuum. Other organizations will move in, try to claim territory." Tiago paused, choosing his words carefully. "My family will be expected to expand our operations, claim what the Russians leave behind." Katerina studied his face in the orange glow of the distant fire. And I don't want to build an empire on other people's blood anymore." The words came out harder than he'd intended, carrying 5 years of accumulated doubt and 20 years of accumulated guilt. "I want something different, Katerina. Something better." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that after tomorrow night, I want to walk away. From the family business, from the territories, from all of it." Tiago cupped her face in his hands, memorizing the way the firelight played across her features. "I want to disappear with you. Start over somewhere new." For a moment, Katerina didn't respond. Tiago felt his heart rate accelerate as he realized he'd just laid his entire future at the feet of a woman who'd already warned him she might vanish when this was over. "Tiago," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "you can't just walk away from your life, your organization, your responsibilities. Vincent can handle the legitimate businesses. The rest, let someone else deal with the violence and the territory wars." Tiago leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "I'm tired, Katerina. Tired of always looking over my shoulder. Tired of ordering deaths. Tired of being feared instead of loved. And you think you can love me?" The question came out vulnerable, uncertain in a way that made Tiago's chest tighten. "I think I already do." The words hung between them like a confession and a promise. Katerina searched his eyes for deception, for the calculation that marked most declarations in their world. Whatever she found there made her breath catch. "Tiago," she whispered, and then she was kissing him with desperate intensity, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed closer. Tiago kissed her back with equal passion, pouring 5 years of loneliness and a lifetime of careful control into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Katerina rested her forehead against his chest. "There's something I need to tell you too," she said quietly. "About my father. About why the Bratva really wants him dead." Tiago felt ice form in his veins. "What about him? He's not just hiding information about their operations. He's hiding information about ours too." Katerina looked up at him, her expression pained. "The files he stole, they include detailed intelligence on American crime families, including yours." The implications hit Tiago like a physical blow. "How detailed?" "Names, operations, financial networks, everything." Katerina's hands gripped his jacket. "Tiago, if the wrong people get access to that information, it could destroy every major crime family on the East Coast." Tiago ran a hand through his hair, his strategic mind already calculating the potential damage. "Jesus Christ, Katerina, do you understand what this means?" "It means that tomorrow night isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about survival." Her voice carried an urgency that made Tiago's pulse quicken. "If we don't stop Petrov permanently, if we don't recover those files, everyone we care about dies." Tiago finished the thought, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like armor. "Vincent, my cousins, everyone in the organization." "Yes." Katerina stepped closer, her hands finding his face. "I'm sorry, Tiago. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you'd choose your family over me." The vulnerability in her voice made something protective and fierce surge through Tiago's chest. "Afraid you'd decide I wasn't worth the risk." Tiago captured her hands in his, holding them against his face as he looked down at this woman who'd become the center of his universe in the space of 3 weeks. "Katerina Volkov," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are worth every risk I've ever taken and 1,000 more I haven't thought of yet." She smiled then, brilliant and beautiful and heartbreaking. Tomorrow night, we end this. All of it." Tiago kissed her again, softer this time, sealing a promise that felt like a vow. "And then, we disappear together." "Together," she agreed. In the distance, sirens wailed as the fire department arrived to battle the blaze that had once been a Bratva warehouse. But Tiago barely heard them. All his attention was focused on the woman in his arms and the war they would finish tomorrow night. 8. The Meridian Club occupied the top 5 floors of a pre-war building in Midtown, the kind of establishment where Manhattan's elite conducted business over single malt whiskey and handshake agreements worth millions. Tiago had been a member for 8 years, long enough to know the layout, the security protocols, and which staff members could be trusted to look the other way when necessary. Petrov arrived 10 minutes ago. Vincent's voice crackled through the nearly invisible earpiece as Tiago adjusted his tie in the men's room mirror. 3 bodyguards, all armed despite club rules, and Katerina, in position, monitoring communications from the service level. Vincent paused. "Boss, I still think this is insane. Too many variables, too many ways for this to go sideways." Tiago understood his old friend's concerns. The plan was complex, requiring split-second timing and absolute trust in people Vincent had never met, but sometimes the most dangerous path was also the only path that led where you needed to go. "Just stay ready," Tiago said, straightening his jacket to ensure his own weapon remained concealed. "When this starts, here it's going to move fast." The private dining room on the 5th floor was elegant in the understated way that screamed expensive taste. Dark wood paneling, crystal glasses, and a view of Central Park that real estate agents would kill for. Tiago arrived precisely on time, noting the positions of Petrov's bodyguards as he entered. Alexei Petrov sat at the head of the table, like a king holding court. At 53, he remained physically imposing, but Tiago detected the slight tremor in his hands that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. The systematic destruction of his operations was taking its toll. "Mr. Valentino," Petrov's English carried only a trace of accent, the result of 20 years in America and expensive speech coaching. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Business is business," Tiago replied, taking the offered seat 3 chairs down from Petrov, far enough to avoid seeming subservient, close enough to demonstrate he wasn't afraid. Also present were Viktor Kozlov, whose scarred knuckles rested visibly on the table in an obvious intimidation display, and Elena Marchenko, whose cold beauty masked the ruthless intelligence that made her so dangerous. The empty chair beside Petrov presumably belonged to Dmitry Volsky, the money laundering specialist. "We have a problem," Petrov said without preamble. "Someone has been targeting my operations with inside information, very specific, very detailed inside information." Tiago sipped his whiskey, keeping his expression neutral. "Sounds like you have a leak, or an enemy with exceptional resources." Elena spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of controlled menace that made smart people nervous. "The kind of enemy who might have allies among the traditional families." The implied accusation hung in the air like smoke. Tiago met her stare directly, allowing just enough irritation into his expression to seem authentic. "Are you suggesting my organization is involved in your problems?" "I'm suggesting," Petrov said carefully, "that recent events have been too coordinated, too sophisticated to be the work of random criminals. Someone with serious backing is coming after us." Tiago leaned back in his chair, projecting the kind of casual confidence that had served him well in dozens of similar situations. "Alexei, in our business, everyone has enemies. Maybe you should look closer to home." "Closer to home?" Victor's voice carried the barely controlled violence that made him useful for enforcement work. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Tiago could answer, the lights flickered briefly. The signal he'd been waiting for. Katerina was in position, the communications jamming was active, and the recording devices were online. "It means," Tiago said, his voice carrying a new edge, "that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who know all your secrets." Petrov's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Dmitry Volkov sends his regards." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Victor lunged for his weapon. Elena's hand moved toward her purse, and Petrov's face went pale beneath his expensive tan. But before any of them could complete their movements, the dining room doors burst open. Katerina entered like an avenging angel in a black dress that managed to be both elegant and menacing. Behind her came 3 men, Tiago didn't recognize, but whose professional bearing marked them as serious operators. "Hello, Alexei," Katerina said, her voice carrying 5 years of suppressed rage. "Miss me?" "Katerina Volkov." Petrov's voice was barely a whisper. "You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointed?" She moved closer, and Tiago saw Elena tense as she recognized the predator that had been hiding behind the art dealer facade. "You always were sloppy with your cleanup operations." Victor made another grab for his weapon, But one of Katerina's men was faster. The suppressed gunshot was no louder than a cough, and Victor collapsed with a neat hole in his forehead. "Now then," Katerina continued as if nothing had happened, "let's discuss the files you've been so desperate to recover." Elena's composure cracked slightly. "What files?" "The ones my father took when he disappeared. The ones containing detailed records of every corrupt official, every money laundering operation, every murder you've ordered for the last decade." Katerina smiled, and Tiago felt a chill at the cold beauty of it. "The ones that could destroy your entire organization if they fell into the wrong hands." "You're bluffing," Petrov said, but his voice lacked conviction. Instead of answering, Katerina nodded to one of her men who produced a tablet computer. The screen showed what appeared to be a secure server interface, file directories clearly labeled with dates and operation names. "Swiss banking records," Katerina read from the screen. "Assassination contracts, corruption payments to federal judges." She looked up at Petrov. "Should I continue?" Tiago watched the interplay with fascination and growing admiration. Katerina wasn't just seeking revenge. She was systematically dismantling her enemies psychologically before moving to the physical destruction. "What do you want?" Elena asked, her intelligence finally overriding her pride. "Justice," Katerina replied. "For my father. For everyone you've killed or destroyed over the years." She paused, her eyes moving to Tiago. "And a future free from your influence." "You can't just walk away from this business," Petrov said desperately. "You know too much. You've seen too much." "There's no retirement in our world." "You're right," Katerina agreed. "There isn't." The second gunshot was as quiet as the first. Elena slumped forward onto the table, her blood spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled wine. Petrov stared at his dead associates, then at Katerina, his face cycling through fear, rage and calculation. "The files," he said finally. "If I give you everything you want, will you give me the files?" Katerina exchanged a look with Tiago, and he saw something pass between them. Understanding, agreement, the kind of wordless communication that developed between people who trusted each other completely. "Alexei," she said softly, "you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a negotiation." 9. The safe house in the Hamptons sat on 12 acres of private beachfront, the kind of property that old money bought and new money coveted. Tiago had purchased it through shell companies 5 years earlier as an emergency retreat, never imagining he'd use it to hide from the consequences of his own choices. "It's beautiful," Katerina said, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Atlantic. Dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too peaceful for the violence they'd left behind in Manhattan. "It's temporary," Tiago replied, though he found himself hoping that wasn't true. The past 18 hours had been a whirlwind of clean-up operations, disposing of bodies, wiping surveillance footage, ensuring that 3 of the most dangerous criminals on the East Coast simply vanished without a trace. "Your friend Vincent is efficient," Katerina observed, not turning from the window. "I can see why you trust him." Tiago moved behind her, his hands finding her waist as he pressed a kiss to the side of her neck. She leaned back against him, and for a moment they simply stood together watching the sunrise. "He's worried about you," Tiago said quietly. "About us. He thinks I've lost my mind walking away from 20 years of building the family business." "Have you?" Katerina turned in his arms, studying his face with those winter storm eyes that had captivated him from the first moment. "Lost your mind?" "I mean?" "Probably." Tiago traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "But if this is insanity, I never want to be sane again." Katerina smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her since the night they'd met. "What happens now? Now we disappear. New identities, new lives. Somewhere far from New York and the kind of people who solve problems with bullets." Tiago paused, a thought occurring to him. "Unless you've changed your mind, unless you want to stay in this world." "Tiago Valentino," Katerina said, her hands sliding up to cup his face. "I've spent 5 years planning revenge. 5 years living for nothing but the moment I could destroy the people who took everything from me. And now that it's done," she shrugged eloquently, "I discover that revenge is a cold companion. I want something warmer, such as love, family, a future that doesn't require constantly looking over my shoulder." Her thumbs traced the line of his jaw. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep in your arms every night. I want to argue about mundane things, like what to have for dinner and whether to watch the news. Tiago felt something tight in his chest, loosen for the first time in years. I want that too, more than I've ever wanted anything. Then we take it. Katerina stood on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. We take the life we want and we protect it. They were interrupted by the soft chime of Tiago's secure phone. Vincent's name appeared on the display, and Tiago felt a familiar twist of anxiety. In their world, emergency calls rarely brought good news. What is it? Vince? We have a problem, boss, a big one. Vincent's voice carried the kind of tension that made Tiago instantly alert. Dmitry Volsky isn't dead. Tiago felt ice form in his veins. Volsky had been the fourth member of Petrov's inner circle, the money laundering specialist who hadn't shown up to the meeting at the Meridian Club. They'd assumed he was simply being cautious, laying low until the immediate danger passed. Where is he? That's the problem, we don't know. But an hour ago, 3 of our legitimate businesses were hit simultaneously. Professional jobs, no witnesses, no evidence, but they left calling cards. Vincent paused. Pictures of Katerina. Recent pictures. Katerina had gone very still beside him, her face draining of color as she processed the implications. If Volsky had current surveillance photos, it meant he'd been watching them for days, possibly weeks. How recent? Tiago asked, though he dreaded the answer. From yesterday. One shows her entering the Meridian Club, another from last night at the warehouse. Vincent's voice hardened. Boss, this guy knows everything. Our movements, our safe houses, probably our entire operation. Tiago ran a hand through his hair, his strategic mind already calculating threats and responses. What else? The hits weren't random. They targeted our financial operations specifically, the legitimate businesses we use to clean money and maintain cash flow. Whoever planned this knows our organization inside and out. Inside help. Has to be. The level of detail required. Vincent trailed off. Boss, I hate to say this, but we need to consider the possibility that Katerina's intelligence network has been compromised. Tiago looked at the woman in his arms, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. They'd been so focused on destroying Petrov and his inner circle that they'd failed to account for outside players, for the possibility that their enemies might be more resourceful than anticipated. There's something else, Katerina said quietly, her voice carrying a note of dread that made Tiago's pulse quicken. Something I should have told you earlier. What? When my father escaped from the Bratva 5 years ago, he didn't just take their files, he took their money too. $200 million from accounts across 3 continents. Katerina's hands gripped his arms. Tiago, Volsky isn't just seeking revenge, he's seeking a fortune. The implications hit Tiago like a sledgehammer. $200 million was enough to buy armies, enough to corrupt entire governments, enough to hunt them to the ends of the earth. Where's your father now? He asked. Safe, hidden. But if Volsky has been tracking us this closely, Katerina's voice caught. Tiago, I think we've led them right to him. Before Tiago could respond, the house's security system activated with a sharp electronic warning. Motion sensors, perimeter alarms, the distinctive sound of vehicles approaching at high speed. Time's up, Tiago said grimly, moving to the window. In the distance, he could see black SUVs cresting the hill that led to the property. Professional vehicles, multiple occupants, the kind of force that didn't come to negotiate. How many? Katerina asked, already moving toward the bedroom where they'd stashed emergency supplies and weapons. Tiago counted quickly. 8 vehicles, probably 40 men, maybe more. He grabbed his phone to call Vincent, but the device showed no signal. They're jamming communications. Katerina emerged from the bedroom carrying a tactical bag and looking like she'd transformed from art dealer to special operations soldier in the space of 30 seconds. There's a boat, she said, at the private dock. If we can reach it, they'll have the dock covered. Tiago checked his weapons, the familiar weight of his Glock providing cold comfort. This was planned too well, too thoroughly. Volsky isn't taking chances. Then we fight our way out. Tiago looked at this incredible woman who'd become his entire world in the space of 3 weeks, and realized that he'd rather die fighting beside her than live without her. Together? He asked. Together, she confirmed. Outside, the sound of vehicles grew closer, and Tiago Valentino prepared to fight the most important battle of his life. 10. The first shots shattered the living room windows as Tiago and Katerina took cover behind the kitchen island. Professional gunfire. Controlled bursts designed to pin them down rather than kill immediately. Volsky wanted them alive. "Service tunnel," Katerina said, pointing toward a door Tiago had assumed led to a utility closet. The previous owner was paranoid about privacy, built escape routes throughout the house. Tiago provided covering fire as they moved, his bullets keeping the advancing figures at bay while Katerina worked the hidden mechanism. The door swung open to reveal a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. "Where does it lead?" he asked, reloading quickly. "Beach access, about 200 yards north of the main dock." Katerina's voice carried the kind of tactical certainty that spoke of careful planning. "There's a speedboat hidden in a cave. We can reach open water before they realize what happened." They moved through the tunnel rapidly, emergency lighting casting harsh shadows on concrete walls. Behind them, the sounds of the assault intensified, doors being blown open, systematic room-by-room clearing, the methodical approach of professionals who knew their business. "Tiago." Katerina stopped suddenly, her hand on his arm. "There's something I need to tell you. About my father. About where he's been hiding." "Now?" Tiago kept his weapon ready, listening for sounds of pursuit. "Can't this wait until we're not being hunted by an army?" "No, it can't wait." Katerina's voice carried a note of desperation that made Tiago focus completely on her words. "Because we're not running to safety. We're running to him." Tiago felt the world shift around him. "What are you talking about? The boat? The cave? The escape route? They're not random. My father has been here, Tiago, in the Hamptons in a facility less than 5 miles from your safe house." Katerina's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been lying to you. Not about my feelings, not about wanting to be with you, but about this. All of this." The sound of approaching footsteps made Tiago grab her arm, pulling her deeper into the tunnel. "Explain, quickly." The plan was always to draw Volsky and the remaining Bratva forces into a confrontation, but not to destroy them, to capture them, to force them to reveal the location of the other stolen files, the ones that could implicate criminal organizations across Europe. Katerina's words came out in a rush. "My father needs those files, Tiago. Not for money, but for leverage, for protection." Tiago felt betrayal cut through him like a blade. "You used me. My organization, my resources, my feelings for you. All of it was manipulation." "No!" Katerina stopped moving, forcing him to face her in the narrow tunnel. "Everything between us is real. The attraction, the trust, the love, all of it is real, but the circumstances—" She reached for his face, and Tiago found himself allowing the touch despite his anger. "Tiago, I never expected to fall in love with you. I never expected you to become more important than the mission. Then why tell me now? Because in about 3 minutes, we're going to reach my father's facility, and when we do, you're going to have a choice to make." Katerina's voice broke slightly. "You can walk away. Take your chances with Volsky and the Bratva. Try to disappear on your own. Or you can trust me one more time and help us end this permanently." Tiago stared at this woman who'd turned his world upside down, weighing love against betrayal, trust against survival. In the distance, he could hear their pursuers getting closer. "What kind of facility?" he asked finally. "The kind that your government doesn't officially acknowledge exists. The kind where people like my father trade information for protection." Katerina's smile was sad and beautiful. "Tiago, Dmitry Volkov has been working for the CIA for 2 years. The revelation hit Tiago like a physical blow. The legendary Russian crime boss, the man who'd supposedly stolen from the Bratva and vanished, he'd been turned, recruited, converted into an intelligence asset. "Jesus Christ," Tiago breathed. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough to change everything. The files he took weren't just criminal records, they were intelligence gold mines. Names of corrupt officials, terrorist financing networks, nuclear materials trafficking routes." Katerina started moving again, pulling him toward what he could now see was light at the end of the tunnel. "The CIA has been using that information to dismantle criminal organizations worldwide. And now they want the rest. The files that Volsky and his allies still control, yes, but they need someone with credibility in the criminal world to help them recover the intelligence." Katerina paused at a steel door marked with official-looking warning signs. "Someone like you." Tiago understood now why Katerina had seemed so confident, so well prepared for every contingency. This wasn't just a revenge mission, it was a recruitment operation. And if I refuse? Then you walk away, and Vincent and I help you disappear somewhere the CIA and the Bratva can never find you. Katarina's hand found the door handle. But Tiago, if you stay, if you help us finish this, what? Then you get something no one in our world ever gets. A clean slate, a chance to use everything you've learned, all the skills and connections you've developed, for something other than violence and crime. She looked at him with eyes that held love and hope and desperate need. You get to be one of the good guys. Before Tiago could respond, explosions echoed through the tunnel behind them. Volsky's forces had found the entrance and were using explosives to clear their path. Time's up, Katarina said, pushing open the steel door. What's it going to be? Tiago looked at this woman who'd lied to him and loved him, and offered him redemption all at the same time. Beyond the door he could see a high-tech facility that belonged in a spy movie, complete with armed guards and satellite communication equipment, and standing in the center of it all, very much alive, and looking exactly like the photographs Tiago had seen, was Dmitry Volkov. "Hello, Mr. Valentino," the legendary crime boss said in accented English. "My daughter tells me you're the man who's going to help us save the world." Tiago felt everything he'd believed about his life, his choices, and his future crumble and reshape itself into something entirely new. "Well," he said to Katarina, he said to, "this certainly wasn't in the brochure." 11. The CIA facility was a masterpiece of hidden technology, built into the cliffside and invisible from both land and sea. Tiago found himself in a conference room that wouldn't have looked out of place in Langley, complete with multiple screens showing satellite feeds, and what appeared to be real-time intelligence updates from around the globe. "Impressive," he said to Dmitry Volkov, who sat across the polished table like a professor conducting a seminar rather than a fugitive crime boss. "How long have you been working for the agency?" 3 years officially. Unofficially, much longer. Dmitry's English was precise, educated, carrying only the faintest trace of accent. "When you reach my level in the criminal world, Mr. Valentino, you learn that the line between legal and illegal becomes quite flexible." Tiago looked at Katarina, who sat beside her father with an expression that mixed relief and apprehension. "And your daughter?" "Has been my primary liaison with agency operations." Dmitry's smile held paternal pride. "Katarina inherited my strategic mind and her mother's beauty, a dangerous combination in any circumstances. What he's not telling you," interrupted a new voice, "is that this operation has been compromised from the beginning." Tiago turned to see a woman in her 40s entering the conference room, her bearing and dress marking her clearly as government intelligence, professional, competent, and carrying the kind of authority that suggested high-level clearance. "Agent Sarah Chen, CIA," she said, extending her hand to Tiago. "And you're the wild card who's been making our carefully laid plans infinitely more complicated." "Agent Chen," Katarina said tightly. "I thought we agreed to keep this internal until Volsky showed up with 40 armed men and enough firepower to level half the Hamptons." Chen's smile was sharp. "Plans change, Ms. Volkov, rapidly." Tiago felt pieces clicking into place. "You've been watching the safe house. We've been watching everything. Your organization, the Bratva operations, every move you and Katarina have made for the past month." Chen activated one of the wall screens, showing what appeared to be surveillance footage. "What we didn't anticipate was that Volsky had access to similar intelligence." The screen showed images that made Tiago's blood run cold. Vincent meeting with unknown individuals, money changing hands, documents being photographed, his oldest friend, his most trusted lieutenant, selling them out to the highest bidder. "Vincent's been feeding information to Volsky for 3 months, Chen continued. "We think the approach was made after your first meeting with Katarina, when it became clear that your organization was going to be drawn into this operation." Tiago felt something break inside his chest. 20 years of friendship, of shared risks and mutual loyalty, shattered by greed and betrayal. "How much does Volsky know?" "Everything. Your movements, your plans, the location of this facility." Chen's expression was grim. "He's not coming to capture you anymore, Mr. Valentino. He's coming to destroy all of us and recover the files that could implicate him in murders across 3 continents." "How long do we have?" Katarina asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. His forces are moving through the tunnel system now, and they've brought enough explosives to bring down this entire cliff face." Chen turned to Tiago. "Which brings us to why you're here." "I'm listening." "Volsky has the final piece of the intelligence puzzle, financial records that tie Russian criminal organizations to terrorist groups in the Middle East and Asia. Without those records, dozens of ongoing operations will be compromised and hundreds of intelligence assets will be at risk. Tiago studied the satellite feeds, showing armed figures moving systematically through the underground passages. And you need someone he'll trust to get close enough to recover them. Someone with criminal credentials, who he believes is motivated by self-interest rather than patriotism. Chen's smile was calculating. Someone like you. What's the plan? Dmitri leaned forward, his expression serious. You surrender to Volsky. Convince him that you're willing to trade Katerina and me for safe passage and a share of the stolen money. Get close enough to his mobile command center to download the files from his secure systems. And then you get out alive, Katerina said, her voice tight with worry, along with intelligence that could prevent terrorist attacks across 2 continents. Tiago looked around the room at these people who'd drawn him into a web of lies and love and international espionage. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a simple crime boss worried about territory disputes and quarterly profits. Now he was being asked to risk his life for causes he'd never considered and principles he'd never examined. There's something else, Chen said quietly. If you do this, if you help us recover Volsky's files and neutralize his organization, the agency is prepared to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? Full immunity for past crimes, new identity, complete with government backing, and a consulting position that would put your organizational skills and criminal knowledge to use, preventing the kind of crimes you used to commit. Tiago felt the weight of the offer, the magnitude of the choice being presented to him. Everything he'd built, everyone he'd been, traded for a chance at redemption and a future with the woman he loved. Katerina, he said, turning to face her, if I don't make it out, you will. Her voice carried absolute certainty, because I'll be there to make sure you do. What are you talking about? Did you really think I was going to let you do this alone? Katerina stood, moving to a wall panel that opened to reveal military-grade equipment. I've been training for operations like this my entire adult life, Tiago. We're partners now, in everything. Agent Chen checked her watch. Volsky's forces will breach the outer perimeter in 10 minutes. If you're going to do this, it has to be now. Tiago looked at Katerina, beautiful and deadly in tactical gear, then at Dmitri and Chen, who were offering him something he'd never thought possible, a chance to be one of the heroes. Together? He asked Katerina. Together, she confirmed. Tiago Valentino, crime boss turned intelligence asset, prepared to risk everything for love and country in equal measure. 12. The confrontation came at dawn, on the beach where Tiago had stood just hours earlier, watching the sunrise with Katerina and planning their escape. Now the sand was churned with the tracks of assault vehicles, and the morning air carried the smell of gunpowder and the ocean. Dmitri Volsky stood 50 yards away, flanked by armed men who looked like they'd stepped out of a military training manual. He was younger than Tiago had expected, maybe 45, with the kind of controlled intensity that marked truly dangerous men. Between them, Katerina knelt in the sand with her hands zip-tied behind her back, a position that was entirely theatrical, but necessary for the deception to work. "Mr. Valentino," Volsky called out, his voice carrying easily across the beach. "You're either very brave or very stupid to come here." "Neither," Tiago replied, walking slowly toward the confrontation with his hands visible and empty. "I'm practical. You have something I want and I have something you want. And what is it you think I want?" Dmitri Volkov, the real one, not the CIA puppet they've been parading around. Tiago stopped 10 feet from Volsky, close enough to see the calculation in the man's eyes. "I know where he is." Volsky's expression didn't change, but Tiago caught the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested intense interest. "Continue." "The man in the facility isn't Dmitri Volkov. He's a body double, chosen for his resemblance and trained to mimic speech patterns and mannerisms." Tiago had rehearsed this lie until it felt like truth. "The real Volkov has been in protective custody in Switzerland for 2 years. Prove it." Tiago nodded to Katerina, who looked up at him with eyes that held love and trust and absolute faith in his ability to pull this off. "Ask his daughter." "Is this true?" Volsky demanded, moving closer to Katerina. "My father is alive," she said, her voice carrying exactly the right note of defeated honesty. Tiago discovered the truth when he accessed CIA communications. The agency has been using a double to protect their asset. Volsky studied her face for a long moment, looking for deception. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he smiled coldly. Interesting. And what do you want in exchange for this information? Safe passage out of the country, for both of us, plus 20% of whatever you recover from the real Volkov's accounts. Tiago let greed color his voice, playing the role of a criminal motivated purely by self-interest. I don't care about your war with the Russians or the CIA's operations. I just want to disappear with the woman I love, and enough money to do it in style. 20% of $200 million. Volsky seemed to consider the math. That's quite expensive for information. It's quite valuable information. Tiago took another step closer, bringing him within arm's reach of Volsky's tactical vest and the communication equipment attached to it. Without it, you'll waste time and resources attacking a CIA facility that contains nothing but actors and government agents. And with it, you get your revenge and your money, plus the satisfaction of knowing that Dmitry Volkov will finally face justice for his betrayal. Tiago let his hand drift toward his jacket, a movement that caused several weapons to swing in his direction. Relax, I'm getting proof. What he actually retrieved was a small device that Agent Chen had given him, designed to look like a smartphone, but actually containing sophisticated hacking software. As he pretended to show Volsky photographs on the screen, the device was wirelessly accessing every electronic system within range. Swiss banking records, Tiago said, tilting the screen so Volsky could see fabricated documents, account numbers, access codes, even the location of the facility where they're holding him. Volsky leaned closer to examine the information, bringing his communication equipment within range of the hacking device. Tiago felt sweat gather between his shoulder blades as he waited for confirmation that the download was complete. Impressive, Volsky said finally, but I have a better idea, which is, you and Ms. Volkov are going to accompany me to Switzerland. If this information proves accurate, you'll get your money and your freedom. If it proves false, Volsky's smile held no warmth. Well, let's hope it's accurate. Tiago felt the plan collapse around him. They'd anticipated that Volsky would want verification, but not that he'd insist on taking them along. Once they were on his private jet, under his complete control, the mission would fail and they'd both end up dead. That wasn't the deal, Tiago said, stalling for time, while his mind raced through alternatives. The deal has changed. Volsky gestured to his men, who began moving to surround Tiago and Katerina. You see, Mr. Valentino, while you've been planning this elaborate deception, I've been planning something much simpler, which is, your friend Vincent told me everything, about the CIA facility, about Agent Chen, about your lovely Katerina's true loyalties. Volsky's laugh was cold and satisfied. And, did you really think I would fall for such an obvious trap? Tiago felt ice form in his veins, as he realized they'd been outmaneuvered from the beginning. Volsky had known about the deception, had played along just long enough to get them isolated and vulnerable. The device you're holding, Volsky continued, isn't downloading my files. It's uploading a virus that will give me access to every CIA system you've been in contact with. By tonight, I'll have the location of every intelligence asset on 3 continents. You son of a bitch, Tiago breathed. Business is business, Volsky replied. Nothing personal. That's when Katerina moved. The zip ties had been pre-cut, held in place by nothing more than careful positioning and acting ability. She came up from the sand like a force of nature, a knife appearing in her hand from somewhere in her clothing. The blade found the gap between Volsky's vest and his throat before his bodyguards could react. Actually, she said, her voice carrying 5 years of suppressed rage, it's very personal. The beach erupted into chaos. CIA operatives who'd been hidden in positions along the cliff face opened fire with precision rifles. Volsky's men, caught between multiple angles of attack, tried to establish defensive positions but found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. Tiago used the confusion to tackle Volsky, driving them both into the sand while Katerina rolled away from the firefight. The older man was stronger than Tiago had expected, and they grappled for control of Volsky's sidearm while bullets whined overhead. The files, Tiago grunted, slamming Volsky's wrist against a piece of driftwood until he dropped the weapon. Where are they? Go to hell, Volsky spat, trying to knee Tiago in the ribs. Already been there, Tiago replied, driving his fist into Volsky's solar plexus. Didn't like the neighborhood. The fight ended when Katerina appeared above them, Volsky's dropped pistol in her hands and an expression of cold satisfaction on her face. It's over, she said simply. Volsky looked up at her, recognizing his death in her eyes. Your father was a traitor, to his country, to his family, to everything he claimed to believe in. "My father," Katerina said, her voice steady and final, "chose love over hatred, justice over revenge. He chose to be better than what he was." She glanced at Tiago, and he saw everything they'd shared, and everything they hoped to share reflected in her winter storm eyes. "I'm making the same choice." The gunshot was quiet, professional, final, but the victory came with a price. As CIA cleanup crews arrived, and the immediate threat ended, Tiago learned that Vincent had escaped during the chaos. His oldest friend was somewhere in the wind, carrying 20 years of organizational secrets and nursing a grudge that would never fade. "He'll come for you eventually," Agent Chen warned as they stood on the deck of a Coast Guard cutter 3 hours later. "Vincent Romano doesn't forgive, and he knows how to wait. Then we'll be ready," Tiago replied, his arm around Katerina's waist as they watched the Hamptons coastline recede into the distance. "The new identities will help," Chen continued, "but they're not foolproof. Your old life will always cast shadows over your new one. The families whose territories you abandoned will remember. The officials you never corrupted will be suspicious of sudden wealth and legitimate success." Tiago nodded, understanding that true escape was more complicated than forged documents and government protection. Some prices were paid forever. 8 months later, in a small coastal town in Northern California, Tiago Romano, formerly Valentino, married Catherine Ross, formerly Volkov, in a ceremony attended by 12 people and a golden retriever named Vincent. The irony of the name wasn't lost on them. The bride wore white, the groom wore grey, and both of them wore smiles that spoke of love tested by fire and found unbreakable. But Tiago's eyes still scanned the small crowd automatically, noting exits and potential threats, old habits that would never entirely fade. Their new life wasn't perfect. Tiago's consulting work with various law enforcement agencies put him in regular contact with the criminal world he'd left behind, creating constant tension between his past and present. Katerina struggled with nightmares and trust issues that surfaced unexpectedly, reminders of 5 years spent planning violence. But they were healing together, building something real from the ashes of their former lives. And when Tiago occasionally caught a glimpse of a familiar face in a crowd, or noticed surveillance that lasted too long, he reminded himself that some threats were worth living with for the chance at redemption. They lived carefully, if not entirely peacefully, ever after. In the distance, Vincent Romano read about the wedding in a private investigator's report and smiled coldly as he added it to a file that had been growing thicker for 8 months. Some debts, he knew, were worth waiting years to collect.